Welcome, Ambassador Regev.
Good morning.
Well, thank you for joining us today. I want to start with a question that I think we're all asking ourselves right now as Antony Blinken travels the region. The U.S. continues to warn of that wider war in the Middle East. He's, of course, talking about Hisbah primarily. And U.S. officials seem to think this is Israel's responsibility. How do you respond to that?
So he'll be meeting with the Prime Minister here in Tel Aviv tomorrow. He's arriving tonight. I'm sure he'll have a series of meetings here. He always does. The meeting with the Prime Minister, of course, being the most important meeting. Look, in his past meetings here and in our other conversations with senior American officials, we are told that there is a chance for a diplomatic solution to the north. In other words, that Hisbah can be moved back from the northern frontier. Ultimately, as you know, the UN Security Council Resolution 1701 says specifically at a first step, I mean, ultimately, Hisbah should be disarmed. But as a first step, that Hisbah should redeploy north of the Litani River, and they have, of course, not done so. Now, it must be understood, we've got all the members of the communities by our northern border have left because they are concerned. They've been left because some of them left by choice and some of them left because the Israeli government asked them to redeploy. But we are not going to see Israeli citizens return to their homes in the north without a solution to the Hisbah problem. And I want to be clear here, there will be no return to October 6th in the north. Israelis will not have these forces just like Hamas right on the border, right by the fence, and living in fear that they're going to crash through the border and attack and kill our people the same way Hamas did on October 7th. It's just not going to happen. And the UN says, of course, that they shouldn't be there in the first place. They should be north of the Litani River. Now, I hope a diplomatic solution makes this possible. But we're getting close to a moment of truth, and diplomacy will be given a chance. But ultimately, Israel will not tolerate the continued presence of Hisbah right on our border. That is unsustainable. The people of northern Israel won't stand for it. We cannot return to normal life in Israel's north as long as Hisbah is right on our border.
Understood. I certainly heard that quite a bit during my recent trip. Let me ask you about something else. The International Court of Justice is going to hear South Africa's case accusing Israel of genocide this week. I noted, by the way, that former Supreme Court Justice Aharon Barak is representing Israel. That's a bit ironic, I think, given how often he appeared in the Israeli press, or his name appeared in the Israeli press over the last year or so. But apart from that, how do you expect this to play out? How does Israel tackle this problem?
So the government of Israel took a decision to engage with the ICJ, and we're sending a top delegation there to The Hague to present Israel's case. Obviously, the South African government is acting in a way that is irresponsible and hypocritical, accusing Israel of genocide, parroting Hamas's mendacious claims, allegations, and we'll be making our case as strongly as we can. And before taking the decision to go to the court, we took the advice of our best legal people in the Ministry of Justice, in the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, in the National Security Council. And we believe we have a chance to fight this and fight it successfully. And we will do so. The South Africans' behavior, as I said, is atrocious. Modern South Africa prides itself on being the rainbow society, yes, saying no to racism. And yet here they've allied themselves with anti-Jewish racists, Hamas. And don't take my word for it. Read the Hamas charter, the way they talk about Jews and Jewish conspiracies. If you read the Hamas charter, not only the Jews have no right to a state in any borders, not only is every Jew a legitimate target for their murderous campaign of terror, but there's all sorts of terrible, preposterous conspiracy theories about the world wars. The Jews started the world wars and profited from them. The Jews pollute the morals of of young, righteous Muslim women, all this sort of stuff that reminds us of mid-20th century anti-Semitism. And for a country that upholds the principle of anti-racism to align itself with these Hamas racists, these people who are openly anti-Semitic, I mean, it's the ultimate hypocrisy.
And of course, just the fact that the South Africans were the ones who submitted this, I think the symbolism was expected to be powerful, and they, from all appearances, they've allowed themselves to become a tool here. Let me ask you about something else, and this, I have to say, it bothered me a bit while I was in Israel. All of the wars on Israel's borders right now, and even beyond Israel's borders, they all track back to one country. And of course, we know which country that is. That's the Islamic Republic of Iran. And yet Israel is trading fire with Iran's proxies, very rarely targeting the regime itself. How would you respond to those who would say that Israel's fighting the wrong fight right now, that dealing with these tactical issues when the strategic challenge of Iran remains, that this would be a mistake on Israel's part?
So you're 100% correct when you say that Israel is being attacked on numerous fronts, and they're all connected to Iran. Obviously, Hamas is connected to Iran, Hamas in Gaza. As has been said numerously, some 93% of their military budget comes directly for Iran. Iran gives them training, gives them weapons, gives them cash. The Iranian connection with Hamas is indisputable. And then in the north, Hisbah would not be the force that it is today. It wouldn't have the rockets that it has today. It wouldn't have the military structure that it has today without the very generous support of Iran. And if we look at what the Houthis are doing in Yemen off the coast, disrupting global maritime routes, disrupting global trade, they clearly couldn't do what they're doing without the active support and encouragement from Tehran. And then you add to that the Shia militias in Iraq, obviously funded, supported, trained by Iran, and in so doing, when they attack the US or if they attack Israel, that's also from Tehran. So you're saying, as many people say, well, maybe instead of fighting the proxies, we should go straight to the head, to the Iranians. So the Israeli position, as I understand it, and I think I'm in a good position to understand that, is if you use the metaphor of an octopus, and that's the one that's often used, that Tehran is the head of the octopus and the Houthis are one tentacle and Hamas is another tentacle and Hezbollah is another tentacle. That if we cut off one of the major tentacles, and that will be Hamas in Gaza, then you weaken the whole beast. In other words, there is a ripple effect. There's a fight going on in the Middle East between Iran and its axis of terror and between Israel and the pro-Western pragmatic Arab states, united with the West, yes, with the United States and others. It's not just Israel against Hamas. It's these two rival coalitions. If, heaven forbid, Israel was to lose, it's not going to happen. But if, from a theoretical point of view, if Israel was to lose our fight in Gaza, that would embolden the Iranian coalition across the board. That would embolden that sort of radical Islamist terrorism, not just in Gaza, but across the region and beyond, in Europe and North America as well. And so if Israel wins, as we will, that's not just a victory, a local victory for Israel against a brutal terrorist organization, but that's a victory against this axis of terror led by Iran. It's a victory for all those pro-Western forces, those more pragmatic forces in the Middle East. And it's a victory for the world, because if you defeat this sort of extremism in Gaza, the ripple effect is a positive ripple effect across the globe. I think that's how we look at the situation.
Well, let's talk about that pragmatic group of Arab states. We often hear that the Qataris are part of that pragmatic group. But as we know, they're not exactly honest brokers here. I mean, they continue to play a role in the hostage negotiations, but they're also sponsors of Hamas. How are we to understand Israel's position here?
So the Qataris have been a problem over years. and they have this relationship with Hamas. As you know, the Hamas leadership is hosted in Doha, in the Qatari capital. They are VIPs there. And how does Qatar justify this? I mean, you wouldn't have a relationship with Al-Qaeda. You wouldn't have a relationship with ISIS, but you have a relationship with Hamas. And President Biden himself said, quote, Hamas is worse than ISIS, end of quote. And yet the Qataris embrace these people. And why is this in any way justified? So the Qataris have been come under increasing criticism for their relationship with Hamas. And their way of responding is to say, well, our relationship with Hamas brings benefits to the West. And they say specifically that we can, through our good offices and our relationship with Hamas, serve your interests too, and specifically to help bring out hostages. So they helped bring out a first group of hostage. That's true. And now the proof of the pudding is in the eating, so to speak. Will they succeed in bringing out another group of hostages? And so far, the jury is out. But it's clear to me that the Qataris, the onus is on them to show they can deliver. Because if they don't deliver, all their nice words of saying, well, our relationship with Hamas is serving some sort of global interest. Well, once again, let's see what can happen. There's still, the official number is 136 hostages held by Hamas in Gaza, including children, including women, including to elderly men, including all the others. What is Qatar capable of delivering? And once again, well, yes, exactly.
Let's find out. Last question for you, Ambassador, before we let you go. There are all these reports this morning, speaking of Qatar, about an Al Jazeera journalist who was taken out by an Israeli airstrike. Is Israel targeting journalists?
Well, first of all, Al Jazeera is one of the reasons that I think Qatar needs to be criticized, because the Al Jazeera network, especially the Arab network, is responsible for a lot of the incitement across the region. You know, if Arab governments sometimes say we have to worry about our people, have very anti-Israel opinions, a lot of that's because of what Al Jazeera has been putting out day and night now for years. This sort of incitement, this sort of anti-Israel diatribe, where the Jewish state is accused of all sorts of terrible, terrible crimes against humanity. And of course, Hamas are just freedom fighters. So, I mean, that's a problem. And that Al Jazeera would accuse Israel of targeting its journalists, that's just one of its many accusations that it makes of Israel that are totally baseless, that are regularly broadcast on the Al Jazeera network. But if you think about it, and you're, you know, about defending democracy, Israel is the only country in the Middle East which actually has an open, free press. Qatar definitely doesn't. And here you have a situation which is truly a touch crazy, where you have an authoritarian regime which has no free press, is telling the only country that has a free press in the Middle East, the only country in the Middle East with a free press, Israel, that we are somehow mistreating journalists.
Okay, well, Mr. Ambassador, thank you very much for joining us. We appreciate your time.
I thank you for having me, and I thank you for what you do.